Kumlana Blakamoras, Matoi Shabbos Parshas Truma. Today's daf is daf Lamed Gimel, which is probably one of the shortest daf in Shas. And we'll start from Lam Beis Amud Aleph on the bottom. For those who learned on Friday, sorry, we do a little chazara here. Just a quick introduction, and that is we learned that if somebody makes a vow and they want to annul it, you can't just annul it. So there's two ways of doing it. One is through charata, which means that you regret making the vow in the first place, and the halach is that the rabbis will not in any way ask you, do you have charata? You have to come forward and offer this regret that you have the charata. Or they do a Pesach. They find an opening saying, if you would have realized this, would you have done it? Including Noilid. Noilid means we say, if you would have realized these circumstances would be as follows, would you have made the neder? And if he says no, then we use that as a form of annulment. But if there's certain kinds of Noilids that we do not, the Hacham say we do not accept, and that is a Noilid which is rear. A Noilid which is rear, as we'll see in the Gemara here, we know it hardly ever happens. That kind of a Pesach we do not do. Now, why not? So basically, there's two ways of understanding why not. One way is that if it's a noilid, that's something that you could have anticipated, then we say you probably did anticipate it, and in your mind you probably made up that if this thing occurs, I don't want the neder to proceed. It's as if you made it conditional that this should not have happened. So if it does happen, therefore you can annul the neder. But if it's something that is rear, means that you did not anticipate that this will happen. If you did not anticipate this will happen, then at the time of the neder, you didn't think about it. So the neder now stands, and you cannot use that as your opening, as your way out, as your exit. That's one way of explaining it. That's Tosfos. The other way of explaining is the Rosh. He learns as follows, that if it's a common occurrence, then if you didn't think about it, had you thought about it at the time of the neder, you probably wouldn't have made your vow. So therefore, we can annul your vow. But if it's something that is so rare and so uncommon, if we would have told you at the time of the neder, look, this is a possibility, you would say, it's never going to happen. And therefore, you did know about it, but you decided it doesn't matter. The risk is so low. So now that it happened, we cannot use that as your exit clause, as your Pesach. So the Mishnah says here, what's the case? The case was, there's a very poor person, and he only owns 3 animals. Remember that a Nazir has to bring 3 animals at the termination of his Naziris. And all he has is these 3 animals. So he decided to donate it to the Eibishter, but the way he thought he'll donate it is by becoming a Nazir first. The problem was when it came the time to bring his karbanas, the animals had disappeared. So now he's stuck. If you don't bring his karbanas, he'll be a Nazir the rest of his life. So he wants to unravel his Naziris. So he goes to the rabbis and he says, look, I need a Pesach. So the question is, can the rabbi say, if you would have known that the animal would have been stolen, would you have made your neder? Now that is something which is very rare, that that the animals get stolen. So even if he would have thought about it at the time of the neder, he would have still proceeded with his neder, because he would say, they're not going to be stolen. They're here now. I'm sure they're here. So what happens? Says the Mishnah, Misha Nada ben Nazir. If somebody made a vow to be a Nazir, and then at the end of the time, he went to the barn to locate his 3 animals. He found they're gone. They were stolen. So he runs to a Rav. What am I going to do? I'm stuck. I got to get out of my Naziris. Give me an exit clause, a Pesach. So it depends. If you made your Naziris prior to the animal being stolen, no, at the time that you made the Naziris was a valid Naziris, the animals were there present, and then they disappeared afterwards. You're a Nazir. What do you mean you're a Nazir? That you're stuck. Because we cannot use, you have to find some other opening. We cannot use the opening, if you would have realized the animals would have been stolen. Because that's something rare, and therefore that kind of a Pesach we will not use. That's how all the Rishonim learn except the Rambam. He learned Hareza Nazir means it doesn't automatically fade away. You can use it as a Pesach, but you need the rabbis to be Mata Neder. However, the Mishnah says, what happens, it turned out to be that they were stolen before you actually made the vow. So when you made the vow, it was predicated on an error. You thought that you still had the animals sitting there in your barn, but they weren't there. Then we say, the whole thing was based on an error, on a misunderstanding. Then we follow Hillel that says a Nazir, Betos is not really a Nazir. If the animal was and the animal stolen first, and then you decided to become a Nazir, but you were not aware, ain't a Nazir, you're not a Nazir. What exactly does it mean you're not a Nazir? Because it's based on the fallacy. But what exactly does it mean you're not a Nazir? So there's an argument here between Rashi and Tosfos. Tosfos holds, what do you mean you're not a Nazir? That means that the rabbis will use this Pesach and they will be mataneder. They'll say, if you were to realize that the animals were no longer there at the time, would you have made a neder? And of course he would say, no, I have no money to buy any other animals. So to say, good, the neder is canceled and annulled. Rashi says, Ein a Nazir means there is no Naziris. You don't need to go to any rabbis to be mataneder. The whole thing is based on an error. There's no Naziris. Anyway, the Gemara now says, "V'zu tois to Nochem Hamadai." Nochem Hamadai, who was a Tana, made this error in Israel at the time of the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So what happened was that there were a number of people in outside of Israel who took upon themselves Naziris, and they then went to Israel to bring their kabbanas. And remember, we learned before that if you make your Nazir outside of Israel, when you come to Israel, you got to repeat the whole thing again. It doesn't count when you did Chutz La'aretz. So they go to Israel and they find out suddenly the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, which means they are stuck forevermore to be a Nazir. They can't get out of it because they have no animals. So they went to Nochem Hamadai. What do we do? We did not know that the Beis Hamikdash was going to be destroyed. Says the Gemara. So when the Nazirim went from Babel, they went to Yisrael, they found Beis Hamikdash Charav. The Beis Hamikdash destroyed. They can no longer be in the Kabbanas. They are stuck within Naziris. They said, "Help, get us out of this Naziris." One said, "Follow. If you would have known that the Beis Hamikdash would be destroyed, would you have made your neder with Naziris?" They said to him, "Of course, I know, because if we became a Nazir, no Beis Hamikdash would be a Nazir forevermore. All we want is 30 days." So he said, "Okay, on that basis, I'm going to annul your neder because this is a case of neilid, and even though it's rare, the Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed. It's uncommon or not anticipated. Nevertheless, according to Chacham, that's good enough." And the rabbis pounced on him. When the Chacham heard about this, said, "What are you talking about? If they made the Naziris and the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed afterwards, you cannot use as a Pesach this Noilid, because this is something that was unanticipated. And therefore, their neder remains, their Nazir remains, and they're stuck. You got to find other ways to get them out of their Naziris. But let's say the Beis Hamikdash is already destroyed, but they just didn't hear about it. So, which means that when they took upon themselves the vow of Naziris, it was based on a mistake because they had no idea that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Then ain't a Nazir, they're not a Nazir. And the two ways you learned before, either not a Nazir at all, or the rabbis will annul their neder. Says the Gemara. Omar Rabba says, an interesting expression there. Shadfu Rabbanan Rabbi Lezer. Rabbanan swept Rabbi Lezer and got him to change his mind. Masechta Nazir follows Masechta Nedarim. In Masechta Nedarim, Rabbi Lezer ben Hurkan is clearly stated that you will use Neilid as an opening, even if it's something unanticipated. We know Rabbi Lezer ben Hurkan was alive during this whole drama here, the drama, because when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai feigned his death, Rabbi Lezer ben Hurkan and Yeshua were the ones who carried out his casket. So he was alive then. And it seems that he did not come to rally in the defense of Nochem Hamadai in this Mishnah. He should have said, Nochem, you're right, because we do use a Noilid as a Pesach, even if it's unanticipated. The fact that he did not join Nochem Hamadai, but he was part of the Chachamim, tells us that he changed his mind, and we were able to convince him. So the Gemara says, Shatfu Rabban Rabbi Lezer, they were swept him away, and they got Rabbi Lezer ben Hurkas to agree with the rabbis. It's not, because in Masechta Nedarim we learn Poischim ben Noilid, the Rabbi Lezer, because he could use Noilid, and the Chachamim Oisim. And over here, Rabbi Lezer ben Hurkas doesn't say anything. Says the Gemara. Now, Amar Rabba says that we learned in the Gemara in the Nedarim there are different ways of making a Pesach. If you would have known that you're called a Rasha, if you would have known, if 10 people would have come over to you and try to give you advice and tell you not to make the neder, would you have followed them? And if he says yes, you say, oh, well, that's an opening, that's a way out. So says Rava, okay, the Beis Hamikdash being destroyed is called Neilid. But what happens if your rabbi, your mentor, someone that you trust, came with you with advice and said, I don't think it's a good idea to become a Nazir, for the Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed. So then, and he says, yes, I would have listened to my rabbi, not because so much I believe the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, but because whatever my rabbi tells me, I listen. And he told me not to accept the Naziris, the rabbi told me, so therefore I'm not accepting the Naziris. Then that's a valid Pesach. Amar Rava. That's not called noiled unanticipated. Rabbanan said, "Ein poischin b'noiled." A noiled that's unanticipated, you cannot use that as an opening. Aval poischin b'tanai noiled. But in certain conditions, if the noiled is attached to something else, we can use. For example, Heichadami, for example, Amni he said to them, if a person came over to you and said to you, the Chor Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed, me having nadritin, if somebody that you respect came over to you and gave you that advice, would you have proceeded to make that vow? So therefore, if he says no, I wouldn't, then that is a good Pesach, because we're not relying on the Chor Beis Hamikdash, we're relying on the advice of a mentor, which is something that happens all the time, and that's anticipated. Says the Gemara further. Amr Abba said, he made a comment. If I was alive at the time when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and this whole discussion was taking place, I would have defended Nachum Hamadeh. I would have said that Churban Beis Hamikdash was something anticipated. They knew it was inevitable, it was happening, and therefore you could use it as a Pesach. What's the? How do I know? Because it says Yirmiyah Navi said to those people who were Rishayim, who were following this false Navi who said, let's side with Egypt, and Hashem said everything will be all right, and so on and so forth. It says in Pasuk, Heichel Hashem, Heichel Hashem, Heichel Hashem. It says 3 times in the Pasuk, Hema. 3 times it says Heichel Hashem. So what exactly is Yirmiyah saying to the Eden? He's saying, don't rely on those Rishayim, because they're telling you that nothing bad is going to happen. I want to tell you is that there will be one Beis Hamikdash destroyed, there will be another Beis Hamikdash destroyed, and then there'll be a third Beis Hamikdash which will last forever with Mashiach Tzidkenu. So the first Zemidrash Rishon u'Mikdash, it's referring to the first 2 Beit Hamikdash. So they knew that it was inevitable. So what do you tell me? It's an unanticipated event. Says the Gemara, you're right. They knew it will happen. They knew it will happen, but did they know when it will happen? They did not. And therefore it's considered unanticipated. Abaye, for a change, is rallying in defense of his teacher Rabbi Yosef, and he said, "Well, you tell me we didn't know when. We knew exactly which year it will happen." But see, it says in Pasuk, Shu'ayim Shivim, 70 groups of 7 years. Now we're Shemitah. 70 times 7 is 490 years. Nechtech al Amcha, your people will be cut off al Irkochech, on your holy city. So in other words, he's telling you that from the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, Daniel is saying, to the destruction of the second will be 490 years, 70 years in Babel, and then 420 years in the Beis Hamikdash. This story happened, the second Beis Hamikdash. So they knew precisely which year is going to happen. Truth be told, in Masechet Avodah Zarah, we're going to learn an argument as to how you calculate the Shemitah. And there is a 2-year period that they're arguing which year it is. But even so, they have a general idea. So Gemara says, no, that's not good enough. Did they know which day? So every day they felt it's not happening today. I don't see it on the horizon. And therefore, for them, it's considered unanticipated. Next Mishnah, there were 6 people walking down the street. We'll call my numbers 1 through 6. And they saw this person coming up towards them. They only saw his silhouette. They couldn't really see, or his profile, they couldn't really see who this was. So an argument ensued. 6 people were traveling on the road. The echad bo kenegdon, and somebody was coming towards them. Omar echad mehen, number 1 said, Hareini nazir shezeh ploni. I am so convinced that that person is, let's say, Shmerel, that I will be a nazir, because it's Shmerel. The echad number 2 says, I am so convinced that it's not Shmerel. Hareini nazir she'ein zeh ploni. I'll be a nazir because it's not Shmerel. So each one's so confident in what they're saying, they say, I'll definitely be a nazir because it is Shmerel or because it isn't. So obviously one of them is right, one of them is wrong. The third person says, Hareini nazir, I will be a nazir, she'echen mekem nazir, because surely one of you 2 is a nazir, so I'm going to be a nazir as well. Now number 3 is definitely a nazir, because definitely one of those 2 will be a nazir. Number 4 comes along and says, She'ein echen mekem nazir, I will be a nazir because I know one of you will not be a nazir, because both of you can be right. Either it is Shmerel or it's not. So I am convinced that one of you are wrong, and I'll be a nazir. So number 3 and number 4 are definitely nazirim. Number 1, number 2 are really a doubt. We don't know which one will be a nazir or not until Shmerel comes forward, and they'll see. Comes along number 5, it says, Sheshneichem nazirim. He says that number 1 and number 2, definitely I feel that you both really want to be a nazir, so I'm also going to be a nazir. Number 6 says, Shekulchem nazirim. Not only number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, but also number 5 is a nazir, so I'll also be a nazir. I'll join the party. The problem is that some of them don't know that 3 and 4 are definite Nazirim, but 1 and 2 are not. They don't. One of them definitely is wrong, and number 5 and 6 are definitely wrong, or at least partly. So what happens there? Beis Shammai says Kula Nazirim. Beis Shammai says because they wanted to be a Nazir, even though it was based on wrong information, it's irrelevant. Remember, he says that even Betas is considered Hegdish, so they're all Nazirim according to Beis Shammai. And Beis Hillel says Ein Nazir Ela Misha Lein is Kaimet Dvarim. Okay, Beis Hillel is very cryptic here, and he says, you know who'll be a Nazir? The one who was wrong. That doesn't make sense. We'll see in the Gemara in a minute. By the way, before we go further, Rashi a few days ago learned the Mishnah exactly the opposite of what we just said. Each one was convinced of what they're saying. So the first person, when he said, I'll be a Nazir, that this is Shmerel, what he's saying just opposite. I'll be a Nazir, the Shmerel is definitely not Shmerel. And it's definitely not Shmerel. And therefore, when he said, I'll be a Nazir, it didn't really mean to be a Nazir because he was convinced that it's not Shmerel. Each one was trying to say that he doesn't want to be a Nazir. And still, Shammai says, because your words said, you said, Hareini Nazir, and therefore, you're a Nazir. Anyway, Rab Tarfon comes along and says, you know what? Ein echad mehem Nazir. Nobody there's a Nazir. Not 1, not 2, neither 3 nor 4, because 3 and 4 are relying on 1 or 2, because why not 1 or 2? Because Rabbi Tarfon says at the time when you accepted Naziris, you had to know definitively that you're becoming a Nazir. The pasuk says, "Ish ki yafta linda neder Nazir Hashem." When you took upon yourself to become a Nazir, it has to be yafli. You have to know 100% that that's the outcome. But at that juncture, when they said there'll be a Nazir, one of them didn't. Neither of them knew 100% whether they're right or not. Till that person, that Pliny, would come forward to them. So therefore, since 1 or 2 are not a Nazir, neither is 3 or 4, nor is 5 and 6. Okay, now we continue the Mishnah. What happens? Okay, let's say they're Nazirim. What happened? Not like Rav Tarfon. Forget Rav Tarfon. They're all waiting to see who this person is. Is it Shmerel or not? The guy ran away. He sees the 6 people congregating and talking about him. He ran away, and now no one knows who's right. So this opinion says ain't a Nazir. Nobody's a Nazir. Not even the first 2, because one of them definitely is a Nazir. No, nobody's a Nazir. Since it's a suffix, nobody wants to be a suffix Nazir, because a suffix Nazir has all these issues. You have to bring karbanos at the end of 30 days. But if you're not a Nazir, you cannot bring the karbanos to the base of Mikdash because it's ordinary animals. You're not allowed to bring chulin to the base of Mikdash. You cannot take a haircut, and a Nazir has to take a haircut. But you're not allowed to cut your payas off. And this guy is going to cut his payas off because you're a Nazir. But if you're not really a Nazir, you're committing a sin. You're not allowed to remove your payas. So therefore, nobody wants to enter suffix Naziris. But Rav Shimon argued before, and he says you do. But he gives a suggestion of how to make it work. Rav Shimon says no. They're all Nazir, but Yaima, this is what you say. You say, no, the person never fronted up. So number 1, number 2 don't know what to do. Yes, each one of them is a Nazir, because now they're a suffix. Maybe you're a Nazir, but maybe you're not a Nazir. So each one says, I will be a Nazir. And if I was right, so I'm a Nazir because according to the law, I have to be a Nazir. If I was wrong, then I take upon myself a voluntary Nazir. So either way, I'm a Nazir. So therefore, I can bring those animals at the end of my period. And therefore, I can take a haircut because regardless, I am a Nazir. The question is only whether it's the obligation from my original statement or I just took it upon myself. It's irrelevant. Says the Gemara. If I was right, then I'm a Nazir because I have to be. But if I'm not, then I will only accept voluntary Nazirs if I was wrong about my Nazir. Says the Gemara, Beis Hillel is very difficult to understand. Beis Hillel says, who is the Nazir? Only the one that his words haven't been fulfilled. Says the Gemara, Mishla is kind with the Vara, but I have a Nazir. Why are you a Nazir? If what you said didn't happen, then why are you a Nazir? You said you'll only be a Nazir if you're right, not if you're wrong. Amar Rav Yehuda, you're right. Let's amend the Mishnah. Say Mishin is kind with what that Hill says. The ones whose words were confirmed, he's the one that has to be a Nazir. Abaye says no. Going, this is what happened, and the Mishnah is teaching you a chiddush. He said, "Inami." This is what he said. He said, "I think that this person is Shmerel." And even if it's not Shmerel, I'm going to Amar Inami La plainly, even if it's not Shmerel, a heavy Nazir, I'll be a Nazir. In other words, first he thought one way, only if it's Shmerel, I'll be a Nazir, and then he changed his mind and says, if it's not Shmerel, I'll be a Nazir, or even if it's not Shmerel, I'll be a Nazir. And the chiddush here is that you can change your mind within a short time span. Toich kedei dibur, the time it takes to say the word Shalom Aleichem Rebbe or Shalom Aleichem Rebbe Meiri, that time you can change your mind. So what did Hill mean when he said, "My line is kind of if his words weren't fulfilled"? Line is kind with his initial words were not fulfilled. He said, "This is definitely Shmerel, I'll be a Nazir." But then now he changed it and he said, "It's not Shmerel." If his second words were fulfilled, nevertheless, he is a Nazir because we follow the second words. You can change your mind. Then the Gemara continues, if he stepped backwards and disappeared, there's no Nazir. It seems from the Mishnah, this last section of the Mishnah seems only because the person disappeared. Therefore, we don't know what the outcome is. There is no Nazir. But if the person would have appeared, he would be a Nazir. Who said that? Rabbi Tarfon just told us that even if the person appeared, since at the time when you took upon yourself to be a Nazir, you weren't definitively a Nazir because you didn't know whether that's Shmerel or not. So you're not. So why talk about a case when he fled? Even if he didn't flee, even if he came forward, still Rab Tarfon said there's no Nazir. So obviously, this very last section of the Mishnah is not Rab Tarfon. So who is it? Says the Gemara, time, but the only reason is because he ran away. The Kaman had he come forward, having another money. So who's the author of that Mishnah? If you're going to say it's Rab Tarfon, me having Nazir, according to Rab Tarfon, even if you would have fronted up, they're Nazir. Even the B'shaita the Nazir, at the time when he accepted Naziris, Lo Yada, he had no idea, whether that Pliny was a person that he thinks it is, or whether it isn't. And according to Rab Tarfon, mi chalala Naziris, in a case where you didn't know 100% the situation, do you become a Nazir? But Tanya, didn't we learn? Rabbi Yehuda says that even though in our Mishnah clearly Rabbi Tarfon said the same thing, but here we bring a brisa with a pasuk, with a basis for his opinion. Rabbi Yehuda said, "Nay, Rabbi Tarfon, ein echad mehem nazir. Neither of them is a nazir. You know why? When is a nazir only at the time when you took upon yourself to be a nazir? It was clear. According to Rabbi Tarfon, if you ever take upon yourself naziris and you make it conditional on something, which means at that moment you don't know for sure whether you're going to be a nazir or not, you're not a nazir, because it says kiyafli. It has to be clear. Ella, so who is it? It's Rabbi Yehuda the Kerihu. It's Rabbi Yehuda of Keri, which you learned before. What happened with Rabbi Yehuda of Keri? The time we learned. If a person says, "I will become a nazir if over here in this barn or this silo or in this granary, I have 100 kor. A kor is 30 saw. I have 3,000 saw of wheat sitting there." Afterwards, for halach, they went. They found that it was all gone. Or part of it was gone or stolen, lost. How in the world are they going to verify? So it's a suffix. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Shimon says, a person, since it's a suffix in the Torah, whether they became a nazir or not, suffix in the Torah general machmer, and this person is happy to be machmer, that he will take on naziris. What about the problem of the animals or taking a haircut? So they do what we suggested in the Mishnah before. You take upon yourself also a voluntary naziris. You say, "Listen, manushach, either this is my obligatory naziris, or if not, this is my voluntary naziris." So you are a nazir, one way or another. But Rabbi Yehuda says Rabbi Yehuda says people don't want to get involved. They want to be a nazir only if it's proper. But if there's any doubts, not interested. So that's our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon holds, even the ilu loinig, had it not been stolen, there was a suffix. Maybe there was 100 kor there, and there was, you'd be a nazir. Is hashtanam have a nazir? So now you're also nazir. But Hachanan here too. Even the yasa to come on. If that person would have come here forward, fronted up, the yadin of the play would then determine one way or another whether this is that person or not. Have a nazir, you would have been a nazir. Hashtanam have a nazir. So all the 6 people have to be a nazir l'chumra, and all 6 people have to be a nazir l'chumra, and they take upon themselves, the mamanashach, either I'm a nazir because I have to be, or I'm a nazir because I'm on a voluntary basis. So the next mission is a very similar case. It's about a koi. A koi is an animal that was born, according to many, from a ram and a deer. And a ram is an animal, a behemoth, and a deer is a chaya. In Jewish law, they're both kosher animals, but in Jewish law, there's a big difference between whether an animal is classified as a behemoth or is classified as a chaya. Number one, covering the blood. So by a bird and by a chaya, like by a deer, you have to cover the blood, kisei adam. By a behemoth, we don't. On the other hand, a behemoth, the fats is treif. Chaylev of a behemoth is treif, but by a chaya, the chaylev is permitted. You're allowed to eat it. Plus, whether you're allowed, klayim, you have to make sure that when you mix the animal with the other animal, we have to know the status. Is this a behemoth, a chaya, and so on. So there's a big argument in the Mishnah. There are three opinions. Is it a behemoth? In other words, we say it goes after the ram. Is it a chaya? Does it go after the deer? Is it a mixture of both, or is it neither? Actually, the next Mishnah there has a very interesting discussion around Meir Nachamim, whether a kelev, a dog, has the status of a behemoth or of a chaya. A domesticated animal or a non-domesticated animal. But the Mishnah says now. So what happened the following? Okay, people got all very excited, and this is what happened. The Raza Koi, here we have 9 people. They saw this Koi. The first guy said, Hareini Nazir Shezeh Chaya. I'm a Nazir, this animal legally has a status of a Chaya. The difference between this Mishnah and the previous Mishnah is the previous Mishnah, that person at the moment, you don't know who he is, but eventually the person will come forward. So it will ultimately be verified. In this Mishnah, it'll never be verified. It's a legal question. What is the legal status of this koi? It will never be verified. So the first person says, I believe that this koi is a behemoth, and I'll be a nazir if it's a behemoth. It's a chaya. And then the next person, number 2, says, Hareini nazir she'ein a chaya. Nope, it's definitely not a chaya, and I'm so convinced I'll be a nazir because it's not a chaya. Third person comes and says, what are you talking about? Hareini nazir she'ein a behemoth. I'll be a nazir because I'm convinced that this animal is a behemoth. Comes along person number 4 and says, Hareini nazir she'ein a behemoth. What are you talking about? I'm convinced it's not a behemoth, and I'll be a nazir. It's not a behemoth. Comes along person number 5 and says, Hareini nazir she'ein a chaya u behemoth. I believe this animal has a state of behemoth and a chaya and all the chumras. So you have to cover the blood, but you're not allowed to eat the fats. Comes along person number 6 and says, Hareini nazir she'ein ze loy chayav loy behemoth. I believe it's a barrier b'fnei atma. It's a separate creature. It's a non-gender. It has a name of its own. It's like, like that. It's just like had by a dragoness. It's a barrier b'fnei atma. Sitting over here. It's not a behemoth. It's not a chaya. It's a third category. That's number 6. Comes along person number 7 and says, Hareini nazir she'echem bekem nazir. I'll be a nazir because one of you guys definitely are right. So one of you guys definitely will be a nazir. So I'll be a nazir. Comes along person number 8 and says, Hareini nazir she'ein echem bekem nazir. One of you definitely is wrong, at least one of you. So some of you are not going to be a nazir, and I will be a nazir because some of you are not a nazir. Come along, person number 9, and he says, Hareini nazir shekulchem nazirim. I believe you're all nazirim because each one of you really meant what you said, and therefore I'll be nazir. Harikula nazirim. They are all nazirim. This is like, again, built on they all believe that they're nazirim, and therefore, like Shammai says, they're all nazirim. Says the Gemara, in one brayse that we learned, Tisha Nazirim. That there were 9, in this case, there were 9 in Nazirim. However, V'tani Idich, another brayse we learned, Teisha Naziriyos, that it's only talking about one person, and this one person now has to observe 9 periods of Naziris. Now, how in the world do you get from this story for one person 9 Naziris? So, Bishleima Tisha Nazir, I understand 9 Nazirim, you're going to have a Gavrat Fei, the Itvis. But also, 9 Nazirim could we have? No, a whole bunch of people involved and engaged in this thing. Yeah, we just said there were 9 people. Fine. That's the case of our Mishnah. Elitation Naziris L'chagaver, that one person should take on, should become 9 different kinds of opinions. Should become nazir. I don't have. How can it be? This guy kept on changing his mind every 5 minutes. First he thought it's a behemoth, then he said not a behemoth. Yeah, no, they're chaya, not a chaya. Both non. Okay, you can see that a person can have 6 different opinions, in a day, and he became a nazir. He'll have to be a nazir 6 different times. Not like that the Mishnah. Avatlas, the last 3. The last 3. How can that be? Remember, one person said that you're all Nazirim, another one said that you're not Nazirim. It's all about himself. How's it work? Amar Rav Sheish said, you know what the Bryson means when he says 9 Nazirius? He witnessed these 9 people arguing, and each one guy says, I am a Nazir, not a Nazir. And then he said, you know what? Hareini Nazir Naziris hakol alai. All those of you who are Nazirim, I will be a Nazir just like you. So since there were 9 people there, and we said that all 9 have to be a Nazir, so therefore he took it all upon himself. I'll be a Nazir for each one of you. So therefore he takes upon himself to be a Nazir 9 for 9 months, 9 different periods of 30 days. Hadin Laloch Beis Shammai. This concludes Beis Shammai, and this finishes the first half of the Masechta. Okay, so we'll continue with Hashem. Everyone have a Shavua Tov, a good luck.